Wyoming Territory, June 1887. The wind clawed at her bonnet as she ran, skirts clutched high. Boots thudding over the dry, packed trail, her heart hammering louder than the hooves behind her. 3 miles west of Sheridan, Persephone Mae Morrison broke free of the only life she had ever known. She did not look back. The shotgun whetting at 17, the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the silence expected of her, it was all behind her now. She had waited until he rode east to Cheyenne on business, packed a satchel with a change of clothes and a loaf of bread, and walked through the back door just past dawn. She took nothing else, not even the locket her mother gave her before passing. It felt like poison now, tied to a life where Persephone had never been allowed to choose. The old mare she had taken from the stable was slow, but steady. At midday, the sun baking her skin, she reached the edge of a ranch nestled against the Bighorn foothills. She slid off the horse, legs trembling. The only thing she had left was her name and the hope someone here would not ask too many questions. A man stepped out from under the lean-to, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, sun-browned, with a wide chest under a plain shirt and suspenders. His hair was the color of chestnuts, too long around the ears, and his jaw was rough with a day's growth. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe a few years older than her. "You lost?" he asked, voice calm but guarded. Persephone swallowed, throat raw. "No, sir, just need work." "A place to stay for a bit." He looked her up and down, not in the way her husband had, not like he owned anything, just taking her in. Her torn hem, the dust on her cheeks, the way she kept one hand tight around the satchel strap. "You run from someone?" he asked. Persephone's jaw clenched. "Yes," he nodded like he had already guessed. "Name's Orren Prescott. This is my place. You hungry?" Her knees nearly gave out from the relief. Inside the small ranch house, Orren gave her a tin plate of beans and cornbread, then leaned back in the chair across from her. The windows were open, letting in the summer air. A rifle rested behind the door, but he made no move for it. "You can stay in the bunkhouse," he said. "No one else out there this season. I will pay you $1 a week if you help with the washing and the garden." She looked up from her plate. "That is more than fair," he nodded again. "One thing," he added, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a brass key and set it on the table between them. "That opens the front door. You come and go as you please. You do not owe me anything." Persephone stared at the key like it was gold. "Why?" she whispered. Orren shrugged. "Because whatever you ran from, you deserve to know you are safe now." She did not cry. She had not cried in years, but something cracked loose in her chest. The next morning, she found a fresh bucket of water by the bunkhouse door and a clean bar of soap wrapped in cloth. He never mentioned it. Just showed her how to dig potatoes in the garden, where the chickens liked to hide their eggs, and how to check the fence for breaks. They worked side by side without much talk. Orren was a quiet man, but he always passed her the shovel without being asked, always waited for her to sit before eating, always looked her in the eye when he spoke. She had not known kindness could feel like this. Steady, undemanding. By the end of the first week, she had stopped jumping when a horse rode past. By the second, she started humming again while sweeping the porch. Orren heard her once and smiled, just barely, before looking away. One evening, late July, they sat on the porch after dark. The stars were out, the land stretching quiet and wide around them. Persephone sipped coffee from a tin cup, her hands finally steady. "You got family?" he asked. "No, your husband going to come looking?" She shook her head. "He is too busy getting drunk and telling folks he owns half the county. He will not come for me. I am not worth the trouble anymore." Orren turned his head, gaze steady. "Do not say that again," she blinked. "You hear me, Persephone? You are worth a hell of a lot more than that." She looked down at her hands, remembering the slap that came the last time she had spoken without permission. And then she looked back up. "Thank you," he nodded once. Then quietly, "You ever want to leave, I will not stop you." "I do not want to leave." They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that did not feel empty. Her shoulder brushed his once. He did not move away. The next morning, Persephone found a small bunch of wildflowers in a jar on the porch rail. Orren had already gone out to the east pasture. She smiled. By mid-August, the garden was bursting with vegetables, and she had turned the bunkhouse into something close to a home. Orren rarely said much, but he had started making excuses to linger near the kitchen when she cooked, or to hand her a pie tin just when she was thinking about baking. One evening, after a long day mending fence line, Persephone brought him a plate of supper. He had taken off his shirt in the heat, and she saw the scar across his ribs. It looked old. He noticed her staring. "Got caught stealing peaches when I was 12. Farmer had a mean dog," she smiled. "Did you get the peaches?" He grinned. "2 of them." "Worth it?" She laughed, the sound cracking out like it had not in years. He looked at her then, really looked. "You laugh like someone who used to do it all the time." She said nothing. Just set the plate down and turned away before he could see the tears behind her smile. Later that night, as she sat on the porch steps watching lightning bugs in the grass, Orren came out and sat beside her. "I want you to know something," he said, voice quiet. She looked at him. "You do not owe me for the roof or the work or the key. You stay because you want to. Not because you are trapped." Persephone did not answer right away. Then she reached down, took his hand, and laced her fingers with his. "I know," she whispered. He looked down at their hands, then back up at her. "Good." The crickets chirped. The sky stretched wide and dark above them. And for the first time in a long time, she began to believe that this life, this quiet, steady life, might be hers to keep. By early September, the evenings cooled enough to see their breath in the mornings. The cottonwoods along the creek turned pale gold, and Persephone took to walking the fence line before breakfast, just to listen to the hush of the grass and feel the stillness before the day began. The bunkhouse had grown familiar, her hands had toughened from work, and her thoughts no longer scattered at every sudden sound. One morning, she found Orren kneeling in the barn, sleeves rolled, wrist deep in a wooden crate of nails and old hinges. "You fixin' something?" she asked, brushing hay from her skirt. "Thinking of building a smokehouse," he said, not looking up. "Got a cow ready for butchering. Would be good to preserve some of it through the cold months." She leaned against the post. "I can help render the tallow." "I learned from my mother." He paused, then glanced up. "Was she from around here?" "No, Missouri. She died before I was grown." Orren straightened, dusted his hands on his trousers. "What was she like?" Persephone hesitated. Soft-spoken. "She used to sit near the hearth and thread needles by lamplight, even after her eyes went bad. She never raised her voice, not even when my brother broke the good china." "You had a brother?" "Had." She folded her arms. "He took off in '83. Last we heard, he joined a survey crew up near Helena. Never wrote again." The quiet that followed wasn't heavy, just present. Orren gestured toward the corral. "You ever worked a calf line before?" She shook her head. "Come on then." "Time you learned." Out in the round pen, he showed her how to loop a rope just behind the ears, how to steady a young steer without scaring it. His hands brushed hers once as he passed the lead rope. She didn't pull away. Later, while they salted ribs under the lean-to, she watched the way he moved around her, not cautious but aware. Like he'd measured her pace and matched it without a word. That night, a storm came in from the west. The bunkhouse windows rattled, the wind hard against the walls. Persephone lay awake, eyes open to the dark. Thunder rolled low and long. She could hear branches tossing outside, the steady beat of rain on the roof. A knock came soft at the door. She opened it to find Orren holding a tin lantern, the flame dancing behind the glass. "Chickens got spooked," he said. "One of 'em's out in the yard. I could use another pair of hands." She pulled on her shawl and followed him out into the rain. They found the hen beneath the rain barrel, feathers slicked down, eyes wide. Persephone crouched and held out both hands, whispering low. Orren stood behind her, silent. The hen startled once, then let herself be gathered back in the coop. Orren fixed the latch while Persephone checked the roosts. When the job was done, they stood side by side under the eaves, wet to the bone. "Storm won't last till morning," he said. "I'm not afraid of storms," she said. "Just what comes after." Orren looked at her then, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "What do you mean?" "I mean quiet can be the scariest thing. When you've lived with noise shouting, breaking glass silence feels like it's waiting to hurt you. He didn't rush to answer. Maybe this silence is different, maybe. He handed her the lantern. You keep it tonight. If the wind gets worse, come knock. She nodded, fingers curled around the handle. Thank you. By mid-month, they set up the smokehouse frame. Persephone held the beams while Orren hammered, the two of them working without need for direction. She didn't notice how easily they fell into rhythm until she caught herself humming again something soft, wordless. Orren glanced over but said nothing. That evening, she brought the ledger book from the main house and sat with it at the kitchen table, squinting at the numbers. You keep records by hand, she asked. Always have. Don't trust memory. She dipped the pen in the inkwell. Some of these entries are faded. You want me to copy them to a fresh book? He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. You do that. I like order. It helps my mind rest, he nodded slowly. I've never known anyone who said that out loud. She finished the line she was copying. Well, you know me now. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he said, I'm glad I do. The next day, a rider came up the lane. Persephone was weeding the far garden bed when she saw the dust trail rising. Orren stepped out of the barn to meet the man, who dismounted and handed him a folded paper. It was sealed with a wax stamp. Persephone stayed by the potato row, watching the two men speak in low tones. Orren glanced toward her once before tucking the letter into his coat. The rider left without dismounting fully. When Orren approached, his expression was unreadable. Marshal out of Cheyenne, he said, asking if I've seen anyone matching a certain description. Sounds like a man who's caused trouble in more than one county. She stood slowly. He looking for me? No, someone else. It's not connected. She let out a breath. I don't like marshals. Neither do I, Orren said. They walked back to the house in silence. At the porch steps, he paused. You got somewhere you go when your heart's too loud? He asked, she thought. There's a stone outcrop past the south pasture. I sit there sometimes. He nodded. I go up to the ridge by the cottonwoods. She tilted her head. You run from things too? Mostly I just need sky. That night she brought him a jar of blackberry jam she'd made from the bush near the creek. He didn't ask what it was for. He just opened it and handed her a spoon. They sat on the porch as the sky turned violet, passing the jar back and forth. Quiet between them, and it wasn't the kind of quiet that hurt. The sheep came down from the hills in early October, driven slow and steady by a neighbor from 2 ridges over, an old Basque herder named Mateo who'd been trailing them since late August. Orren had offered to let him graze through the north pasture. The grass had held well through the dry months, and there was more than enough for both flocks. Mateo nodded once when he arrived, eyes sharp beneath a weathered hat, and brought with him a black dog that answered only to low whistles and never barked. Persephone watched from beside the smokehouse, arms crossed against the wind. The sheep moved like a river of wool, stirring dust as they passed. She hadn't seen that many animals in one place since she was a girl, riding in the back of a wagon through Kansas prairie. Never thought I'd see a Basque herder this far east, she said once Mateo was out of earshot. Orren leaned on the fence rail beside her. He's been coming through a long while, doesn't talk much, but he plays fiddle in the evenings if you ask polite. Does he stay long? 2 weeks, give or take, depends on the grass. She nodded, brushing hair from her cheek. You trust him? I trust his dog, Orren said. But that's usually enough. That night, Mateo played by the fire just outside the barn, a tune low and mournful that lingered in the rafters and curled through the apple trees. Persephone sat on a stool near the edge of the light, sewing a patch over the knee of her work dress. Orren sat across from her, carving the handle of a new tool he hadn't named yet. You ever learn music? He asked, not looking up from his blade. My mother had a dulcimer, she said. I used to pluck it when she wasn't home, never got past 3 songs. You remember them? Bits. They come back sometimes when I'm alone. You could play again. There's not one here. I could build one. She looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. You know how, I can learn. I've made worse things. She set the needle aside. If you build it, I'll try to remember the songs. He nodded, then kept carving. Mateo's fiddle mourned on. The frost came sharp 2 mornings later. Persephone woke to white dust across the garden rows and a thin crust of ice on the water barrel. She dug out her wool coat from the trunk beneath the bunkhouse bed and lit a lantern before sunrise. Orren was already in the barn, mending a crack in the feed bin. "You lose anything to the cold?" she asked. "Just my patience. Chickens got loud about it. I tucked straw in the coop last week." "Should help." He straightened, brushing sawdust from his palms. "You think ahead." "I had to. When things went wrong, there wasn't anyone else to fix them." He didn't answer, but his gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. Later that day, she stood by the creek with a basket of apples, watching the water move under a crust of ice near the banks. The trees had gone bare almost overnight, their leaves carried off in the wind and caught in the fence posts like scraps of old letters. She heard his boots before she turned. "I was thinking," Orren said, hands in his pockets. "If you'd rather winter in town, I can arrange it. There's folks I trust. Mrs. Talbot boards women, keeps a clean place. You want me to leave?" "I don't." "Then why ask?" "Because I know what it's like, being somewhere you're not sure you belong." She met his eyes fully. "I belong." He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I wanted to hear you say that." She looked down at the apples, then back up. "I want to stay, Orren. I want to work through the snow and see the sky change and bake bread in your stove when the wind howls through the eaves." "I know that don't mean much to most folks, but it means something to me." "It means everything to me," he said. She didn't speak. Just took his hand, her gloveless, cold fingers curling into his calloused palm. The days shortened. Snow came in fits, light at first, then heavier. They hung thick curtains over the bunkhouse door and stacked wood high along the back wall. Persephone took to drying herbs along the kitchen rafters and stitching quilts by lamplight. Orren built shelves for her sewing and left her tools carved with her initials, not all at once, just here and there, like quiet gifts he didn't want praised. One evening, as she set a pot of stew to simmer, she glanced toward the porch and saw him standing there with a bundle wrapped in linen. "I told you I'd try," he said, placing it on the table. She unwrapped it carefully. A dulcimer, plain but smooth, the wood grain warm under her fingers. She didn't speak, just held it, eyes stinging. He sat in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. "If it's no good," she played 3 notes, then another. The sound was soft, uncertain but true. Then she said, "I remember one of the songs." "Go on," he said, so she played. And when the song ended, she looked across at the man who had given her room to breathe, and something inside her settled like a gate swinging shut behind her and a door opening ahead. "We could build a life here," she said quietly. He reached across the table, took her hand in both of his, and said, "We already are." Outside, the wind rattled the porch rail, but the fire burned steady, and she didn't feel afraid of the quiet anymore. By November, the wind off the bighorns had turned sharp, and the last of the sheep had moved south with Mateo. The pasture stood bare and brown, the earth brittle beneath frost-laced mornings. Persephone wrapped her shawl tighter as she crossed the yard with a pail of ashes from the stove, scattering them near the root cellar where the ground dipped low and wet. Orren had shown her how to keep the ice back from the door hinges, and she remembered. Inside the house, the scent of lye soap and beeswax clung to the shelves. She'd spent the afternoon boiling water and scrubbing the hearthstones with a rag until her shoulders ached. Her hands had roughened more than she'd expected, and the skin along her knuckles split when the air turned dry, but she didn't mind. She'd grown tired of softness that cost her too much. Orren came in near dusk, his coat stiff with cold and a birch branch slung over one shoulder. "Found this near the creek," he said, setting it down by the hearth. "Dry but sound, thought it might do for shelves in the smokehouse." She nodded, brushing dust from her skirt. "I could sand the edges down come morning." He pulled off his gloves and stared at the branch a moment, then said, "You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to think about surviving?" Persephone folded the rag and set it aside. I used to think about that all the time. Now. I don't know, I think I'm already doing it. He didn't speak for a moment, then moved toward the table and sat across from her. His eyes were darker in the low light, the edges of his mouth pulled thoughtful. I was supposed to be a preacher's son, he said. My mother taught scripture, my father ran a circuit out near Sweetwater. Folks expected I'd follow. I didn't. Why not? I didn't believe in telling folks what God wanted from them when I didn't know what he wanted from me. She studied him, hearing something quiet in his voice that hadn't been there before. What did you do after? Went west. Took work where I could. Built fence lines, broke horses, dug wells, never stayed long till I found this land. She leaned forward slightly. Why stay here? Because it was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. Persephone's fingers traced the rim of the cup beside her. That's what I want. Something that holds still. Orren looked at her, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This came in the last mail run, from the land office in Cheyenne. She hesitated. You writing to the government? Not exactly. He unfolded it carefully and slid it across the table. It's a deed. I filed to add the south parcel under my name. It's not much, but it runs along the creek. There's a spot flat enough for another house if someone wanted it. She read the lines slowly, her heart thudding behind her ribs. You're offering me land. I'm offering you a choice. You stay here, you have your own space. If you want to build something, plant something, it's yours, not mine. Not anyone else's. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper again. No one's ever given me anything without asking something in return. I'm not asking, he met her gaze. I just want you to know I see you here, not as someone passing through. As someone building something beside me. The silence held, but it felt like warmth rising through the floorboards. Later, when the house had gone still, she stood by the window and watched snow begin to drift down, soft and slow. Orren remained at the table, head bowed, carving a new handle for the hatchet. She crossed the room and touched his shoulder. When spring comes, she said, I'd like to plant lavender along the fence. He looked up, eyes steady. Lavender, it keeps the moths out and it smells like home. The kind I never had. He set the carving knife down. Then we'll plant it. She didn't step away. He rose slowly, standing just close enough that she could feel the warmth between them. One breath, then another. Her hand rose to his chest, resting over the fabric of his shirt where she could feel the steady beat beneath. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. I know, he answered, and when he kissed her, it wasn't urgent or uncertain. It was quiet, like everything else he gave her, steadfast, unspoken, and real. Outside, the snow fell thicker, cloaking the hills and barns and fences in white. But inside the house, there was warmth enough to carry them through the long winter. By late November, the last of the snow had settled thick across the hills, and the world held still in white silence. Persephone stood at the window of the main house, her breath fogging the glass as she watched a pair of mule deer cross the far fence line, hooves barely leaving prints in the fresh powder. Behind her, the hearth glowed with a steady flame, and the scent of dried rosemary clung to the air from the bundle hung near the stovepipe. Orren had gone out before sunup to check the feed stores. She'd watched him from the porch, his coat lined with frost by the time he reached the barn. He hadn't said much the night before, but she'd seen the way he lingered at the ledger, lips pressed tight. Something weighed on him. When he returned, he shook the snow from his shoulders and set a small parcel on the table without a word. She unwrapped it carefully, 2 skeins of dyed wool, deep plum and slate blue. I thought you might want something to work with, he said, pulling off his gloves. The man who passes through with the supply wagon owed me for a calf I helped him pull last spring. She ran her fingers over the yarn, surprised by the softness. You remembered I used to knit. He hung his hat by the door. I remember everything you tell me. She folded the wool back into the cloth, heart warm in her chest. As the days shortened further, they fell into a rhythm shaped by winter. She rose before first light to tend the stove. Orren fetched wood and water, and the two of them worked side by side without need to fill the hours with talk. She began a blanket with the plum yarn, casting each stitch with care. He built a trap for snow hares and brought in the first catch before Christmas Eve. That evening, she brought in a small pine branch and set it on the mantel, tying a strip of muslin around it. Orren watched her from his chair, a half-carved yoke resting on his lap. "I never marked Christmas much," she said, adjusting the branch. "Not after my mother passed, but I'd like to this year." He nodded once, thoughtful. "What would make it feel like yours?" She turned toward him. "Just you." He didn't speak. Instead, he rose and crossed the room, his hand finding hers in the quiet. The lamplight caught the edge of his smile, not wide, just enough to reach his eyes. They shared supper by firelight, and after the plates were cleared, he reached into the drawer of the sideboard and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made you something," he said, setting it in her hands. "Not sure it's fine, but it's honest." She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in soft cotton, lay a hair comb hand carved, smoothed with oil, the teeth even, the back set with a line of tiny notches she realized were the shape of lavender sprigs. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I wanted to give you something that stays. Something that says you belong." She set the box aside and stepped into his arms. Her hand rested over his shoulder and she tilted her face up to his. "I already do." He kissed her gently, nothing rushed or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. That night, they lay beside each other beneath the quilt she'd finished just that week. No words passed between them as she rested her head beneath his chin, their breathing slowly matching, the snow whispering against the roof above. When spring came, it came all at once. The creek broke loose of its ice, running high and silver through the pasture. Persephone stood barefoot in the thawed earth, sleeves rolled, as she planted the first of the lavender starts Orren had helped her trade for through a neighbor. They'd marked out a small garden near the south edge of the property, and she pressed each root into place with care. "You ever name a place?" Orren asked, leaning on the fence rail nearby. She looked up, brushing soil from her hands. "No, maybe we should," she considered that. "Let's wait until the lavender blooms. Then we'll know what it is." That summer, they built a second structure, half storage, half workshop, using boards salvaged from an old barn Orren helped dismantle for a widow west of town. Persephone kept jars of preserves on the back shelf and hung quills of garlic from the rafters. The dulcimer found a place on a wall hook, and the sound of its music drifted through the open windows on warm evenings. One morning in August, they rode into Sheridan together, side by side on horseback, to file a joint deed at the county office. The clerk didn't ask questions, just stamped the paper after they signed and handed it back with a nod. On the ride home, Persephone held the folded document tight against her chest. That fall, she found herself humming the second song she'd learned as a girl. She played it for Orren one evening, and he listened with his eyes closed, hands folded in his lap. The first snow came early that year, and the lavender had already gone dry and brittle, but she tied bundles together with twine and hung them from the rafters. The scent lingered in the house through the cold months, soft and steady. And when the wind howled against the eaves, they faced it together, wrapped in each other's warmth, knowing there was no more running, no more hiding, only a life they'd built with bare hands and quiet hearts. Years passed. The garden grew wide, the smokehouse filled each season, and the dulcimer gained new songs. They added a porch swing out front, and on evenings softened by dusk, they sat close, her hand resting in his, the silence between them full and easy. They never left that land. They never wanted to. And the lavender, when it bloomed, painted the fence line in soft violet, just as she'd dreamed.